Fisherman lived alone for 15 years, until 8 men boarded his ship and took everything. Thomas Fisher woke to the sound of engines approaching his boat, anchored in the isolated bay where he had lived for 15 years. The noise cut through the silence of dawn like a blade, making his heart race in a way he hadn't felt in years. 8 men climbed aboard without permission, completely ignoring his protests. Thomas tried to rise from the hammock where he slept, but his trembling legs barely held him up. The youngest of the group, a man maybe 25, looked straight into his eyes with an intensity that left him speechless. "You're Thomas Fisher, aren't you?" the young man asked, and there was something familiar in his voice. "Who wants to know? Get off my boat!" Thomas shouted, trying to sound threatening, but his voice came out hoarse and weak. "My name is Jason," the young man said, removing a worn cap from his head. "Jason Mitchell Fisher." The surname hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. His eyes widened as he studied the young man's face. It was like looking into a mirror from the past, seeing himself at 25. The same square jaw, the same deep-set dark eyes, even the small scar above the left eyebrow. "Impossible," Thomas murmured, leaning against the side of the boat. Jason pulled a yellowed photo from his shirt pocket and handed it to him. In the faded image, Thomas saw himself as a young man, embracing a pregnant woman with brown hair. His hands shook as he recognized Melissa, his daughter. "My mother always said I'd meet my grandfather one day," Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. The other 7 men stood silent, watching the scene unfold. Thomas noticed they all wore fishermen's clothes, their faces weathered by sun and salt. One of them, a gray-haired man in his 60s, stepped forward. "Hello, brother," the older man said, and Thomas felt the world spin around him. "Robert," he whispered, barely able to speak the name. "It's really me, Thomas. 15 years is a long time." Thomas staggered back, gripping the boat's ropes. His mind struggled to process what was happening. Robert, his younger brother, was standing in front of him after all these years, and that boy Jason was his grandson, the son of Melissa, the daughter he had abandoned. "You can't be here," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "Not after what I did." "Mom's sick," Jason said, ignoring his grandfather's words. "Really sick. The doctors say she needs a kidney transplant. We came to get you for testing." The word "mom" echoed in Thomas's mind. Melissa had always been his little girl, even when he left her at just 8 years old. Now she had a son and she was sick, very sick. "I can't," Thomas said, shaking his head frantically. "You don't understand. I can't go back. Not ever again." The men began moving around the boat, not to loot, but as if searching for something specific. Thomas tried to stop them, but his strength wasn't what it had been 15 years ago. "What are you doing? Stay away from my things." Jason walked to an old wooden crate beneath the bow and carefully opened it. Inside was a thick stack of yellowed envelopes, all sealed and never sent. "We found them," Jason said, holding up the letters for the others to see. Thomas froze. Those letters. He had written them over the years, always on the same date, Melissa's birthday. Pleas for forgiveness he'd never had the courage to send. Letters where he poured out his soul, explaining why he had to leave, begging her to forgive him. "How did you know about the letters?" Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Robert took a step forward, pulling a letter from his pocket as well. But this one was different, newer, and already open. "Because one of them reached us," said Robert, carefully unfolding the letter. "A bottle with this letter was found on the beach in Galveston 3 months ago. A child discovered it while playing in the sand." Thomas recognized his own handwriting. It was the letter he had written the year before, on a particularly difficult night when loneliness weighed on his chest like an anchor. He had placed it in a bottle and tossed it into the sea, with no real hope it would ever reach anyone. "If anyone finds this letter," Robert read aloud, "please tell my daughter Melissa Mitchell that her father never stopped loving her. Tell her I live in Angel Bay, on the Texas Gulf Coast, in a blue boat called Forgiveness. Tell her not a day goes by that I don't think of her and the foolish thing I did." The words of his own letter hit Thomas like violent waves. He remembered every word he had written that night, drunk on whiskey and longing. "The letter arrived on the 15th anniversary of your leaving," Jason continued. "Mum said it was the best birthday gift she ever received, knowing you were alive." "She wouldn't have wanted to see me," Thomas said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Not after what I did to the family." One of the other men, younger, around 30, stepped forward. Thomas noticed his resemblance to Robert. "Uncle Thomas, I'm Michael, Dad Robert's son. Your family never stopped searching for you." The word uncle sounded strange to Thomas's ears. He had lost not only his daughter, but an entire generation of nephews who had grown up without knowing him. "I hurt a lot of people," Thomas said, looking directly at Robert. "Especially you, brother. What I did that day at sea—" Robert raised a hand, cutting him off. "The accident wasn't your fault, Thomas, never was. A big wave, a loose rope. These things happen at sea. You saved my life that day. But you were hurt because of me. A broken leg that healed perfectly. Look." Robert took a few steps, showing he walked just fine. 15 years searching for you just to say I'm okay, that I've always been okay." Thomas fell to his knees on the boat's deck. 15 years of guilt, 15 years of self-exile, 15 years believing he had ruined his brother's life. And there Robert stood, whole, healthy, saying there had never been anything to forgive. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Thomas asked between sobs. "We searched for a long time," Jason said. "Mom hired detectives, placed ads in newspapers, traveled to dozens of coastal towns, but you hid well." Jason knelt beside his grandfather and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mom always knew you'd come back one day. She taught her children to sail, telling the same stories you told her when she was little. Stories about the sea, about fish, about reading the clouds to predict the weather." "She remembers that?" Thomas asked, surprised. "Every word. And she taught us all. Me, my brother Brandon, and my sister Olivia. We all know how to sail because of your stories." Thomas looked around and noticed the other men had begun inspecting different parts of the boat. They weren't damaging anything, just assessing its condition. "What are you doing?" "Preparing the boat for the trip back," Robert said. "This hull isn't fit for open water, it needs repairs." "I'm not going back," Thomas said, standing quickly. "I can't." "Dad is waiting," said Jason, his voice heavy with urgency. "The doctors said she doesn't have much time. Her kidneys are failing more and more." One of the men who had been inspecting the boat's engine looked up. "This engine won't last 10 miles offshore," he said. "It's corroded by the salt water." Thomas recognized the man. It was Frank, an older fisherman who had worked at the port of Galveston when he still lived there. Frank had always been known for his skill with marine engines. "Frank, you're here too." "Hey, Thomas, 15 years, kid. I missed you." "But why did you come? We barely knew each other." Frank stopped tinkering with the engine and looked straight at Thomas. "Because when we found out you were alive, the whole fishing community came together. You were one of us, and we never leave a fisherman behind." Thomas looked around, trying to process everything that was happening. These men had traveled hundreds of miles, left their own families and work, just to find him. And all because of a bottle he had thrown into the sea in a moment of despair. "I don't deserve this," Thomas said. "You don't know what I did. Why I really ran away." Jason and Robert exchanged glances. It was clear they knew more than they were letting on. "We know about the accident," Jason said softly. "Mum told us everything. How you tried to save Uncle Robert when the storm hit your boat. How you blamed yourself for his injury." "But there was more," Thomas insisted. "Things you don't know." Robert stepped closer to his brother. "Like the fact that you lost the family boat trying to save me, or how you went into debt to pay for my medical bills, or how you sold our house to take me to the best doctors in the state." Thomas was stunned. How did Robert know all this? "I found out years later," Robert continued. "When you ran, I started digging. I discovered the debts you took on, the sacrifices you made. You didn't run from shame, brother. You ran because you'd lost everything trying to save me." Robert's words hit Thomas like a hurricane. For 15 years he had carried not only the guilt for the accident, but also the shame of losing everything the family had owned. Their father's boat, the house they grew up in, a lifetime of savings, all sacrificed to make sure Robert got the best care possible. "You should hate me," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "I destroyed our family's legacy." "You saved my life," Robert replied, his own eyes glistening. "And you spent 15 years punishing yourself for doing the right thing." Michael, Robert's son, stepped forward. "Uncle, do you want to know how we got the boats to come all the way here?" he asked. Thomas nodded, unable to speak. "We sold our boats," Michael said. "Me, Dad, Frank, all of us. We pooled the money and rented this bigger vessel for the trip, because family is worth more than any boat." "You did that? For me?" Thomas asked, disbelieving. "We did it for us," Jason corrected, "because a family isn't complete when one of its own is lost at sea." The men kept working on the boat as they talked. Thomas watched, still struggling to believe this was real. One of them, a young man in his 20s, approached shyly. "Mr. Thomas, I'm Tyler, Frank's grandson. I wanted to show you something." Tyler pulled a small, worn notebook from his pocket. When Thomas opened it, he saw it was filled with notes on navigation, fishing techniques, weather forecasting. "My grandpa Frank taught me all this," Tyler said, "but he always said he learned from the best fisherman he ever knew. You." Thomas took the notebook with trembling hands. He recognized some of the methods noted down. They were techniques he had developed during his early years as a fisherman. Did Frank really say that? Always. He said you could predict storms 3 days before they arrived, that you knew the fish schools better than the fish themselves. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Frank stopped working on the engine and smiled. "It's true, son. You were a legend among the fishermen. You still are. When people found out you were alive, half the harbor wanted to come along on this trip. But why didn't I know about this before? Why did no one ever tell me?" "Because you ran away before we could tell you," Frank replied. "And when we tried to find you, you'd vanished without a trace." Jason approached again, this time carrying a folder of documents. "Grandpa, I need to show you something," he said, carefully opening the folder. Inside were birth certificates, photos, and other papers. Jason pointed to Melissa's birth certificate. "Look at Mom's name, Melissa Thomas Mitchell Fisher." Then he showed his own, Jason Thomas Mitchell Fisher. "And my sister Olivia Thomas Mitchell Fisher. And my brother, Brandon Thomas Mitchell Fisher." Thomas read the names over and over, unable to believe it. "All of you. You all have my name." "Mom insisted," Jason said. "She said her children and grandchildren would always carry their grandfather's name, so he'd never be forgotten. But she should hate me," Thomas whispered. "I abandoned her when she needed me most." Jason and Robert exchanged another glance. It was clear there were still things Thomas didn't know. "Grandpa," Jason said carefully, "do you remember the letter you left for Mom before you left?" Thomas shook his head. He had fled in the middle of the night, leaving only a quick note saying he wouldn't return. Jason pulled another envelope from the folder, this one much older and worn. "This is the letter you left 15 years ago." Thomas took the paper with trembling hands and read his own words, written in a night of despair. "My dearest Melissa, Daddy has to go away, not because he doesn't love you, but because he loves you too much. I've done terrible things, lost everything that belonged to our family. You deserve a better life far from the shame I've brought to our name. When you grow up, you'll understand. I love you more than the sea loves the shore, Dad." Mum kept this letter for 15 years, Jason said. And every time someone asked why Grandpa had left, she'd show them the letter and say, "Because he loved us too much to let us sink with him." Thomas folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. All these years, he had imagined Melissa growing up angry at him, hating him for abandoning her. He never thought she would understand. "She really doesn't hate me. She searched for you for 15 years, Robert said, spent all her savings hiring detectives, traveled up and down the Texas Gulf Coast looking for you. And when she got pregnant with Jason, She said it would be a way for you to come back to the family, even if through your grandson. Robert paused, as if deciding whether to continue. And there's one more thing you should know about Melissa. What? She became a teacher, a navigation instructor at a technical school in Galveston. She teaches young people to sail using the exact same techniques you taught her as a child. Thomas felt his legs weaken again. Melissa had turned the few memories she had of him into a career. She was passing on everything he had taught her. And her students? Thomas asked. Over 200 young people have graduated from her school, Jason said proudly. They all learned to sail using the techniques of the legendary Thomas Fisher, as she always refers to you. She really talks about me to her students? Every class, Jason confirmed. She tells the stories you used to tell her, about how to read the currents, how birds signal the presence of schools of fish, how the color of clouds predicts weather changes. Robert approached, carrying some tools. Uncle, we found the issue with the engine. It's serious, but nothing we can't fix. It'll take a few hours. I'm not going back, Thomas said firmly. I can't face Melissa. Not after all these years. Then she'll have to face you, Jason said calmly. What do you mean? Jason pulled a cell phone from his pocket and dialed. After a few seconds, Thomas heard a woman's voice on the other end. Jason, did you find him? It was Melissa's voice, deeper than the child's voice he remembered, but still recognizable. Thomas felt his heart stop. We found him, Mum. He's okay. Thank God. Put him on the phone. Jason held the phone out to Thomas, who recoiled as if it were a venomous snake. I can't, he whispered. Dad, Melissa's voice came through the phone. Dad, I know you're listening. Thomas closed his eyes, trying to hold back tears. Dad, I need you to come home. I'm sick, and I need your help. Melissa, Thomas whispered, taking the phone with trembling hands. Hi, Dad. My daughter. You don't have to say anything right now. You just need to come home. I have so much to tell you, about my life, about your grandchildren, about all the years that have passed. I ruined everything, Melissa. I lost everything that belonged to the family. No, Dad, you didn't lose anything. Everything that matters is here, waiting for you. The call abruptly cut off. Jason looked at the phone and grimaced. The battery died. Thomas stood holding the silent phone, still processing his daughter's words. After 15 years, he had finally spoken to Melissa, and she hadn't shown anger or resentment, only love and longing. Frank approached, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Thomas, we got the engine running, but it won't last a long trip. It needs new parts. Where are we going to find parts out here in the middle of nowhere? Robert asked. We can't, Frank replied. We'll have to call for a tow. Thomas looked around. His secluded bay, which had been his refuge for 15 years, suddenly felt like a prison. He wanted to see Melissa, to meet his grandchildren, but he was afraid, terrified. There's a problem, Jason said, checking his own phone. We don't have signal here, and our radio doesn't have enough range to call for help. So we're stuck here? Thomas asked. Unless you know a way out of here, Robert said. Thomas looked at the sea surrounding the bay. He knew those waters better than anyone. There were routes only he knew, channels between the islands that could lead them to open waters, where they could call for help. I know a route, Thomas said slowly, but it's dangerous, especially with this damaged engine. What's the risk? Frank asked. A passage between two rocky islands. The current is strong and the reefs are treacherous. One mistake and the boat splits in half. And if we don't try, we'll be stuck here for weeks, until someone finds us by chance. Jason looked at the other men who seemed to be waiting for his decision. Melissa doesn't have weeks, Jason said. The doctors told her she needs the transplant as soon as possible. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. These men had risked everything to find him, and now he had to decide whether to risk all their lives to try to return. If we attempt the passage, I'll have to take command of the boat, said Thomas. You'll have to trust me completely. We always do, said Robert. That's why we're here. Thomas looked at each of the men. He saw determination on their faces, but also fear. They knew it was risky, but they were willing to try. All right, said Thomas, taking a deep breath. "Let's do it." The next few minutes were filled with intense preparation. Thomas took command of the boat for the first time in 15 years, giving precise instructions to each man. Robert was in charge of the anchor, Frank the engine, Jason and Michael the ropes, and the others handled the safety equipment. "Listen carefully," said Thomas, his voice carrying the authority of an experienced captain. "The passage will be quick and violent. When I give the command, each of you must do exactly as I say, no questions. A second of hesitation could cost us dearly." Everyone nodded gravely. "Frank, start the engine, slow and steady. We'll need all the power we can get." The engine coughed several times before catching. It made a strange noise, but it was running. "Robert, raise the anchor. We're leaving the bay." Thomas took the helm and guided the boat out of the sheltered bay. As they neared open water, the waves grew larger, and the boat began to rock more violently. "Up ahead," Thomas shouted over the noise of the engine and waves. "Do you see those two rocky islands?" The men looked where he pointed. Two masses of stone rose from the sea like giant teeth, with only a narrow channel between them. "The passage is right between them," Thomas continued. "It looks impossible, but there's an underwater current that can carry us through. The problem is we have to enter at the exact moment, or we'll be thrown against the rocks." Jason stared at the passage and swallowed hard. It looked like there was barely enough room for the boat to fit. "Grandpa, are you sure we can make it?" "I've gone through there dozens of times," Thomas replied, "but never with a faulty engine and 8 lives depending on me." As they approached the passage, the current grew stronger. The boat began pulling toward the rocks, and Thomas had to fight the helm to keep it on course. "Frank, I need more power. The engine's at its limit. I can't push it further." The waves crashed against the rocks with deafening force, sending white foam high into the air. Thomas calculated the speed of the current, the force of the wind, the weight of the boat. These were calculations he'd made instinctively for decades. "Get ready," Thomas shouted. "We're going in now." He turned the helm sharply to the right, using a larger wave to give the boat momentum. For a moment it seemed they would crash straight into the rock on the left. "Trust me," Thomas yelled, seeing the panic in the men's eyes. At the last second, the underwater current he knew so well caught the boat and pulled it into the center of the passage. They slid between the rocks with meters to spare on either side. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. "We made it!" Jason shouted, hugging his grandfather. But the celebration was cut short by a loud noise from the engine. Frank rushed to check and returned with a worried look. "The engine's overheating. It won't hold much longer." "How much time do we have?" Thomas asked. "Maybe 20 minutes before it gives out completely." Thomas looked around, trying to get his bearings. They were in open water now, but still far from the mainland. "There's an island about 15 kilometers from here," said Thomas. "If we can make it there, we can call for help on the radio. The signal is better in that area." "Can we get there with this engine?" asked Robert. "We'll have to." Thomas pushed the engine to its limit, trying to squeeze every last bit of power from the failing machine. The boat cut through the waves in a race against time as white smoke began to rise from the engine compartment. That's when Jason, who was at the bow watching the horizon, shouted, "There's a storm forming!" Thomas looked where Jason was pointing and saw dark clouds gathering quickly on the horizon. He knew the signs. It was a strong storm and it was heading straight for them. "How much time do we have?" Robert asked. "About 2 hours," Thomas replied, studying the clouds. "Maybe less." The engine chose that exact moment to make an even more alarming noise. Frank yelled from the engine compartment, "It's leaking oil, it won't last another 10 minutes. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility. 8 men were depending on his decisions, and their options were running out fast. A failing engine, an approaching storm, open water all around them. "Jason," Thomas said, "do you know how to sail?" "Mom taught me the basics, but I've never sailed in open water." "What about you, Michael?" "Just the basics too." Thomas looked at the other men. They all shook their heads. They were experienced fishermen, but used to motorboats, not sails. "All right," Thomas said, making a decision. "We'll have to take the risk. Frank, shut off the engine before it destroys itself. We'll use the sail." "But Mr. Fisher," Frank protested, This boat wasn't made for open water sailing. It'll have to be. It's our only chance. The men worked quickly to set up the makeshift sail. It was too small for the boat, but it was all they had. Thomas took the helm, using every gust of wind to keep the boat moving in the right direction. "The storm's coming faster," Jason said, watching the clouds now covering half the sky. "I know," Thomas replied, trying to stay calm. "We'll have to face it." That's when Robert, who was helping with the ropes, suddenly cried out in pain and collapsed onto the deck. "Robert!" Thomas let go of the wheel and rushed to his brother. Robert was clutching his chest, breathing heavily. "It's my heart," he whispered. "I've had trouble before." Thomas felt panic rising. His brother was having a heart attack in the middle of the ocean, with a storm closing in and no way to call for medical help. "Michael, did you bring any of your father's medicine?" Thomas asked desperately. "Yes, but it's in the bag we left on the other boat." Jason took the wheel while Thomas tended to Robert. He made his brother as comfortable as possible and tried to keep him calm. "Robert, look at me, breathe slowly. You'll be all right." "Thomas," Robert whispered weakly, "if something happens to me, promise you'll go home. Melissa needs you." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Thomas said firmly. "We're getting home together." But even as he spoke, Thomas could see Robert getting worse. His breathing grew more labored and his skin turned pale. The storm hit the boat with full force at that moment. The wind howled, the waves grew taller, and the small boat was tossed from side to side like a toy. "Hold on tight," Thomas shouted, returning to the wheel. Jason struggled to stay upright beside his grandfather, helping with the ropes. The boat climbed and plunged with the massive waves, and seawater began pouring over the sides. "Someone needs to bail this water out," Frank yelled. Michael and Tyler started bailing water with buckets, but it seemed like more water was coming in than they could remove. The boat was getting heavier and slower. "Grandpa," Jason shouted over the noise of the storm, "we can't hold our course." Thomas looked around. The storm was worse than he had anticipated. 6-meter waves battered the boat from all sides, and the wind was so strong they could barely keep the sail up. That's when an especially large wave hit the boat broadside, tilting it dangerously. Jason lost his balance and was thrown toward the edge of the boat. "Jason!" Thomas yelled, letting go of the helm again. The young man was clinging to the side of the boat, half his body in the water. If he lost his grip, he'd be swept away by the stormy current. "I can't pull myself up," Jason shouted, fighting against the waves, trying to drag him off the boat. Thomas didn't hesitate. Even at 65, he jumped into the water without a second thought. The icy sea hit him like an electric shock, but he ignored the cold and swam toward his grandson. "Grab my hand," Thomas yelled, reaching out to Jason. The boat was rapidly drifting away from them, pushed by the wind and waves. The other men shouted and tried to throw ropes, but it was hard to hit their target with the boat rocking so violently. Thomas managed to grab Jason and started swimming back toward the boat. But the waves were too strong and he felt his strength failing. His muscles ached and his lungs burned. "Grandpa, leave me," Jason cried. "Save yourself." "Never," Thomas answered, still swimming. "I already lost 15 years of your life. I won't lose you now." That's when Thomas felt an extra surge of strength. As if all the years of guilt, all the years of isolation, had turned into pure determination. He wouldn't lose another family member. He wouldn't let Jason drown. With a superhuman effort, Thomas pushed Jason closer to the boat. Robert, still weak from his heart attack, threw a rope, and Michael managed to aim it just right. "Grab the rope," Robert shouted. Jason caught it and was pulled back onto the boat. Thomas was right behind, hauled in by the other men. "We did it!" Frank cheered, helping pull Thomas aboard. But once back on the boat, Thomas could barely move. The effort of saving Jason, combined with the freezing water and his age, had taken a heavy toll. "Grandpa, how are you feeling?" Jason asked, wiping water from his eyes. I'm okay," Thomas said, though he clearly wasn't. "And you?" "I'm okay because of you." Jason hugged his soaking grandfather, and for the first time in 15 years, Thomas felt what it was like to have a real family. People who risked everything for you, who wouldn't abandon you even in the worst circumstances. The storm raged on for 2 more hours. The small boat was pushed to its limits but held together. The men worked side by side, bailing water, adjusting the sail, tending to Robert and Thomas. When the clouds finally began to break and the waves calmed, they spotted land on the horizon. "That's the island I told you about," Thomas said, his voice hoarse from shouting during the storm. "We'll make it there." With the last rays of the afternoon sun, the boat reached a small beach on the island. It was uninhabited, but had an abandoned weather station with a working radio. Frank managed to contact the Galveston Coast Guard. "This is the emergency vessel," Frank said into the radio. "We have a man with a heart condition and need urgent medical rescue." "Copy that, emergency vessel. What's your position?" Frank relayed the coordinates, and within an hour, a rescue boat arrived at the island. Robert was immediately attended to by the paramedics and transferred to the speedboat. "Thomas," Robert said before being taken away, "promise me you'll see Melissa." "I promise, brother." The rest of the group was rescued the next day. Thomas spent the night on the island, staring at the stars and thinking about everything that had happened. In 24 hours, his life had completely changed. When he finally arrived at the port of Galveston, a crowd was waiting. Fishermen, family members, and among them, a 40-year-old woman with brown hair and eyes he recognized immediately. Melissa. She ran toward him as soon as she saw him step off the speedboat. Thomas stopped halfway, still unable to believe he was finally seeing his daughter after 15 years. "Dad," Melissa said, stopping in front of him. "Melissa, my girl." They embraced in the middle of the port as people applauded around them. Thomas cried as he hadn't in decades, feeling the full weight of the lost years and the joy of their reunion. "I'm sorry, my girl. I'm sorry for everything." "You don't have to apologize, Dad. You were doing what you thought was right." Melissa stepped back slightly to look at her father. "You're thinner and older. 15 years at sea will do that to a person. But your eyes are the same kind eyes I remember." Jason approached the two. "Mom, he saved my life today in the storm." Melissa looked at Jason, then at Thomas. "Of course he did. He's always been a hero. He just didn't know it." Medical tests confirmed Thomas was a match to donate a kidney to Melissa. The surgery was scheduled for the following week, but Melissa insisted her father stay at her house during the preparations. On the first night, Melissa showed Thomas the school where she worked. The walls were covered with photos of students who had graduated from the navigation course. "They all learned the techniques you taught me," Melissa said proudly. "You really remember the things I taught you, every word. And I always told the students I'd learned from the best navigator on the Texas Gulf Coast." Melissa also showed him a shelf full of trophies. "From the school's navigation competitions, we win every year. The judges are always impressed by the techniques our students use." "Techniques I taught an 8-year-old girl," Thomas said, amazed. "A girl who grew up believing her father was the wisest man in the world." That night, Jason brought his siblings to meet their grandfather. Brandon, 22, was a marine mechanic. Olivia, 19, studied marine biology. "You all chose professions tied to the sea," Thomas observed. "Mom always said we had salt water in our veins," Brandon said, "because of you. And now we can finally learn straight from the source," Olivia added. During dinner, Thomas shared stories of his 15 years alone in Angel Bay. He talked about watching the birds, predicting the weather, and developing new fishing techniques. "You could write a book," Melissa said, "or teach at the school." "I don't know if I still have a knack for teaching." "Dad, you taught a daughter who taught 200 students." "Of course you do. The transplant surgery was a success. Thomas donated a kidney to Melissa, and both recovered well. During the recovery period, Robert also fully recovered from his heart condition. It was during those weeks in the hospital that Thomas truly got to know his family. Jason was studying naval engineering, dreaming of designing safer fishing boats. Brandon had developed a new, more efficient marine engine. Olivia researched ways to preserve marine life while maintaining sustainable fishing. "You've all followed paths connected to the sea," said Thomas, amazed. "Because the sea has always been part of our family," replied Melissa. "Even with you far away, your stories kept us tied to it." Frank visited Thomas in the hospital and brought him an offer. "Thomas, we want you to come back to work with us at the harbor. Frank, I'm 65 years old. I don't know if I still have the energy to fish every day. It's not for fishing. It's for teaching. The young fishermen need to learn the old techniques. With all this modern equipment, they're losing the traditional knowledge. Teaching. You'd be the official instructor for the Fishermen of Galveston. You'd teach traditional navigation, weather forecasting, sustainable fishing techniques. Thomas looked at Melissa, who smiled. Take it, Dad. It's your chance to share everything you've learned. But I don't have a degree, a certificate, nothing like that. You have something better, said Frank. You have 50 years of experience and the respect of every fisherman in the region. 2 weeks after being discharged from the hospital, Thomas gave his first lesson at the Galveston harbor. 15 young fishermen gathered in a circle around him, eager to learn. First lesson, Thomas said, isn't about fishing, it's about respecting the sea. What do you mean, sir? Asked one of the young men. The sea isn't our enemy or our employer, it's our partner. We treat it well, it treats us well. Thomas spent the morning teaching about currents, how to read the clouds, and the signs that indicate the presence of fish schools. The young fishermen listened, fascinated. Mr. Thomas, said one of the young women, is it true you can predict storms 3 days in advance? It's not magic, Thomas laughed. It's observation. The sea tells us everything. We just have to know how to listen. Jason watched the lesson from the back of the room, proud of his grandfather. Later, when the students had left, he approached him. How was your first class, Grandpa? Better than I expected. These young folks are sharp. They learn fast. Mom said you've always been a natural teacher. Your mother's always been too kind to me. Jason looked out at the sea beyond the harbor. Grandpa, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you regret the 15 years you spent alone? Thomas thought for a moment before answering. I don't regret it, Jason, because it was during those years that I learned to be the man you all deserve as a father and grandfather. If I'd come back 15 years ago, I'd still be the broken man who ran away. Now I'm the man you all saved. No, Grandpa, you saved yourself. We just showed you the way home. 3 months later, Thomas had become something of a celebrity in the fishing world. Fishermen from other towns came to Galveston to attend his classes. Melissa suggested he write a book about traditional navigation. I've never written anything, sweetheart. I don't know if I could. Then we'll write it together. I'll put it on paper. You tell the stories. And so they began working on the book, The Sea and Its Lessons, a collection of traditional navigation and fishing techniques combined with Thomas's personal stories. Robert made a full recovery and began helping at Melissa's navigation school. Michael opened a boat repair shop and always consulted Thomas on the toughest problems. One day, 6 months after their reunion, Jason brought his grandfather some news. Grandpa, I have a surprise for you. What kind of surprise? Jason took him to the harbor, where a new boat was anchored. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was sturdy and well built. The fishermen in the community got together and bought this boat for you. Thomas was speechless. For me? For you and the family, so we can sail together, like we always should have. On the side of the boat, in blue letters, was written the name, Forgiveness Earned. Who chose the name? Asked Thomas, moved. It was Mom's idea. She said you spent 15 years on the boat, Forgiveness, waiting to earn it. Now, you finally have. That weekend, the entire family sailed together for the first time. Thomas at the helm, Melissa by his side telling stories to the grandchildren, Jason and his siblings learning advanced navigation techniques. Dad, said Melissa as they watched a group of dolphins following the boat, are you happy? Happier than I deserve to be. You deserve all the happiness in the world. You always have. You know what moves me the most? Thomas said. What? You forgave me for things I didn't even know needed forgiving, and you loved me for things I didn't even realize I'd done right. Melissa rested her head on her father's shoulder. That's how family works, Dad. It forgives the flaws and celebrates the virtues, even when the person isn't there to see it. I wasted 15 years running from guilt you never assigned to me. They weren't wasted, Dad. They were years of learning. You came back wiser, stronger, and with so much more to teach. Jason approached the two. "Grandpa, Mom's right. If you'd come back 15 years ago, maybe you wouldn't be the same grandpa I know today." "How so?" "The grandpa I met is someone who faced a storm to save me, who survived 15 years alone at sea, who sacrificed everything for his family. That's the grandpa I'm proud of." Thomas looked around the boat, seeing his family gathered, the calm sea under the afternoon sun, and felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. Brandon, who was fishing at the stern, shouted, "Grandpa, I caught a fish, but I don't know what kind it is." Thomas went over and smiled when he saw the fish. "It's a young grouper, good to eat, but even better to release so it can grow." "How do you know that just by looking?" 50 years of experience, and now I'll teach all of it to you." Olivia, who was studying the marine plants stuck to the boat's hull, looked up. "Grandpa, is it true you know every fish species in this area?" "Not all, but most. The sea is like a giant library. The more you read, the more you learn." "Could you teach me? For my marine biology studies?" "Of course, my dear. It would be an honor." That afternoon, Thomas taught Brandon how to fish sustainably, showed Olivia different marine species, helped Jason better understand ocean currents, and reminisced with Melissa about the stories he used to tell when she was little. When they returned to the harbor at the end of the day, a small group of people was waiting for them, some of Melissa's students and fishermen who had heard about the family outing. "Professor Thomas," said one of Melissa's students, "Professor Melissa always says you know incredible sea stories. Could you tell us one?" Thomas looked at Melissa, who nodded encouragingly. "All right, I'll tell the story of a fisherman who spent 15 years believing he'd lost his family, only to discover his family had spent 15 years waiting to save him." The people sat on the harbor pier as Thomas told his own story. He spoke about the accident, the guilt, the years of isolation, and how 8 brave men changed his life. "And what's the lesson of the story, Professor?" asked a young fisherman. "That sometimes we lose ourselves trying to protect the people we love. But if the love is true, those people will find a way to bring us back home." When the story ended, the crowd applauded. Melissa walked up to her father. "Dad, you have a gift for storytelling." "I learned that from you, daughter, watching how you teach your students." "No, Dad. You've always had that gift. I remember the stories you used to tell when I was little. It was as if the sea came alive in your words." Jason joined the conversation. "Grandpa, since you're going to write a book with Mom, could you include those stories too? Not just the sailing techniques, but the life lessons?" "What kind of lessons?" "Like how to forgive yourself, how to accept help, how to understand that family isn't something you lose forever." Thomas thought about his grandson's suggestion. Maybe you're right. Maybe the most important lessons aren't about how to sail the sea, but about how to sail through life. Melissa smiled. "Then let's make 2 books, one technical and another about the life lessons you've learned." "2 books? I barely know how to write one." "Dad, you're a natural storyteller, and I'm a teacher. Together we'll manage." That evening at Melissa's house, the family gathered for dinner. It was the first time in 15 years that Thomas had sat at a family table, surrounded by people who loved him. Robert arrived during dinner, fully recovered from his heart trouble. "How are you feeling, brother?" Thomas asked. "Better than ever. And you?" "Like I've come back to life." Robert smiled. "You know, Thomas, all those years I searched for you. I sometimes thought about what I'd say when I finally found you." "And what did you think?" "I thought about talking about forgiveness, about guilt, about the accident. But now that you're here, I realize I don't need to say any of that." "Why?" "Because you've already forgiven yourself, and that's all I ever wanted." Michael, who was helping set the table, interrupted the conversation. "Uncle Thomas, can I ask you something?" "Of course, nephew." "During the 15 years you were alone, did you ever think about giving up?" Thomas stopped eating and considered the question. "Many times, especially in the early years, but there was always something that stopped me." "What?" "The hope that one day I might make peace with myself, and maybe, just maybe, find my way back to all of you." "And what kept that hope alive?" Memories. Every time Melissa called me her hero when she was little, every time Robert said I was the best brother in the world. They were small things, but they carried me through the hardest days. Melissa wiped a tear from her eye. Dad, you were my hero, you still are. No, daughter, you're the heroes. You saved me from myself. Jason raised his glass of water. A toast to Grandpa, who taught us it's never too late to come home. Everyone raised their glasses. And to the family who taught us that home isn't a place, but the people who love you unconditionally, Thomas added. After dinner, Thomas stood on Melissa's porch, gazing at the distant sea. Jason joined him. What are you thinking about, Grandpa? How strange life is. I spent 15 years running from the sea, and it was the sea that brought me home. How so? If I hadn't thrown that bottle with the letter, you never would have found me. The sea carried my message to you. Mom always said the sea connects people who are meant to find each other. Your mother is a wise woman. She learned from you. Thomas smiled. No, Jason. I'm the one learning from her. I'm learning that forgiveness isn't something you ask for, but something you accept. I'm learning that family isn't about being there in person, but about being there in heart. Melissa appeared on the porch, bringing her father a cup of coffee. What are you two talking about? About the lessons life teaches, Jason answered. And how sometimes it takes a lifetime to learn things our children already know, Thomas added. Melissa sat beside her father. Dad, can I confess something? Of course. All these years, sometimes I felt angry at you. Not for leaving, but for not coming back sooner, for missing so many important moments. Thomas felt his chest tighten. And what changed? When I saw you jump into the sea to save Jason, I understood that the father I always knew existed was there all along. He just needed the right moment to show himself. Do you forgive me for missing so much? Dad, there's nothing to forgive. Because the moments we lost in the past don't compare to the ones we'll have in the future. How can you be so sure? Because now I have my father back, and my children have their grandfather, and my uncle has his brother. We have a whole lifetime ahead to make new memories. Jason nodded. Grandpa, do you remember the first thing you said when you woke up in the hospital after surgery? I don't remember much from that day. You said, I'm home. You didn't even know where you were, but you said you were home. Because I finally was, Thomas replied. Home isn't just where you live, it's where you're loved. Melissa rested her head on her father's shoulder. Welcome home, Dad. In the weeks that followed, Thomas settled into a routine he'd never imagined possible. Mornings were spent teaching young fishermen at the harbor. Afternoons, he worked with Melissa on the book they were writing together. Evenings were for family dinners and telling stories to his grandchildren. Robert moved into a house near Melissa, and the two siblings saw each other daily. They talked about the past, made plans for the future, and for the first time in decades, acted like the best friends they'd always been. Thomas, Robert said one day, remember when we were kids and dreamed of having our own boats? I do. You wanted a red one and I wanted blue. And now you have a blue boat, and I have Michael's workshop to take care of the family's boats. Our childhood dreams came true just 50 years later. And in a way we never could have imagined. Melissa's sailing school became famous along the Texas Gulf Coast. Students came from other states to learn the techniques Thomas taught. The book he and Melissa were writing had already caught publishers' attention. Dad, Melissa said one day, we've received an interesting offer. What kind? A publisher in New York wants you to give a series of lectures on traditional navigation at universities. Lectures? Me? You're considered an authority on the subject. Researchers across the country are studying your methods. But I've never lectured to college students. Dad, you teach fishermen every day. What's the difference? The fishermen know me. They respect me. The students will just see an old man without a degree trying to teach things they could read in books. Jason, who'd been listening, stepped closer. Grandpa, can I tell you something? Of course. Last week, an oceanography professor from the state university came to watch one of your lessons. Know what he said? What? That in 30 years of teaching, he'd never seen anyone explain ocean currents so clearly and practically. He said you should teach at his university. Thomas was stunned. He really said that. And he wasn't the only one. Professors from 3 different schools have come to observe you. Melissa smiled. Dad, you don't need a degree to teach. You have something far more valuable, experience and the ability to share what you know. But what if I embarrass myself? What if I can't answer their questions? Dad, you survived 15 years alone at sea. You taught 200 kids to sail through your daughter. He saved his grandson's life in a storm. Do you really think he won't know how to answer questions about navigation? Robert joined the conversation. Thomas, accept the offer. It's your chance to share everything you've learned with an entire generation of new sailors. What if it goes wrong? What if it goes right? Jason countered. Grandpa, the worst that can happen is you discovering you're an even better teacher than you imagined. Thomas thought for a moment, looking at his family gathered around him, supporting him unconditionally. All right, he finally said. I'll accept, but only if you all help me prepare. Of course we'll help, said Melissa. We're a family. That's what families do. That night, Thomas stayed up late, organizing his notes on navigation. 50 years of experience at sea, techniques passed down through generations, personal observations about currents and weather. He had much more to teach than he'd realized. Melissa walked into the office where he was working. Dad, still awake? I'm organizing my notes for the lectures. I didn't realize I'd accumulated so much knowledge. Dad, can I ask you a personal question? Always. Are you happy with the life you have now? Thomas stopped writing and looked at his daughter. Melissa, for 15 years, I lived thinking I'd lost everything that mattered. Now I've discovered not only have I gotten it all back, but I've gained so much more. How so? When I left, you were a child. Now you're an incredible woman, a teacher, a mother. I have 3 wonderful grandchildren I barely knew. My brother is alive and well, and I've discovered I have a calling to teach that I never knew existed. So you're happy? I'm more than happy, sweetheart. I'm whole. Melissa hugged her father. I'm whole now too, Dad. My family is finally together. And it will stay that way. I promise I'll never leave again. I know, Dad. Because now you know you can face any storm, as long as we have each other. 3 months later, Thomas gave his first lecture at a university in Houston. The auditorium was packed with professors, students and researchers interested in traditional navigation. Melissa, Jason, and the whole family sat in the front row cheering him on. Good afternoon, Thomas began, his voice slightly nervous at first. My name is Thomas Fisher, and for 50 years I've sailed the waters of the Texas Gulf Coast using techniques my father taught me, which his father taught him, and so on. As he spoke, his confidence grew. He talked about reading clouds to predict storms, identifying underwater currents, how seabirds signal the presence of fish. The difference between modern and traditional navigation, Thomas said, isn't that one is better than the other. It's that traditional navigation teaches you to connect with the sea, while modern navigation teaches you to master it. A professor raised his hand. Professor Fisher, what was the toughest situation you've ever faced at sea? Thomas thought for a moment. A storm a few months ago when I was trying to save my grandson after he fell overboard. That's when I realized all the techniques in the world mean nothing if you don't have someone to fight for. The lecture was a success. By the end, dozens of people approached to ask questions, exchange contacts, and invite Thomas for more talks. How was it, Grandpa? Jason asked as they finally left the university. Better than I expected. These young people are curious, asking smart questions. And you answered everyone perfectly, Melissa said proudly. It's because I finally understood something important. What? That teaching isn't about showing how much you know. It's about helping others discover what they can learn. On the way back to Galveston, Jason asked a question that had been on his mind for weeks. Grandpa, can I ask you something about the 15 years you spent alone? Of course. Did you ever think about how different things might have been if you'd come back sooner? Thomas looked out the car window, watching the distant sea. I've thought about it sometimes. But you know what I realized? What? That maybe I needed those 15 years to become the man you all deserve as a father and grandfather. If I'd come back sooner, I'd still be the broken man who ran away. And now? Now I'm the man you helped rebuild. And that makes all the difference. Melissa, who was driving, smiled. Dad, you've always been the man we deserved. You just didn't know it. How can you be so sure? Because a man who sacrifices everything for his family, who carries the guilt of an accident that wasn't his fault, who survives 15 years alone and still keeps the ability to love it, that man was always special. You're the special ones, for never giving up on me. That's what families do, Dad. They never give up on each other. When they got home, they found Robert waiting with news. Thomas, a letter came for you. A letter? Who even knows me besides you all? Robert smiled mysteriously. It's from the city of Galveston. Thomas opened the letter and read silently, his eyes widening. What does it say, Dad? Melissa asked. They want to give me the title of Honorary Citizen of Galveston for contributions to traditional navigation and maritime education. Jason jumped with joy. Grandpa, you're going to be officially recognized, but I haven't done anything special. Dad, Melissa said, you've taught dozens of young fishermen. You're writing a book that will preserve traditional techniques for future generations. You've given lectures that are changing how universities teach navigation. If that's not special, what is? Robert put a hand on his brother's shoulder. Thomas, you've always been special. Now the whole world will finally know it. The ceremony to award the title was scheduled for the following month. The entire fishing community would be invited, along with local officials and family. They'll probably want me to give a speech, Thomas said nervously. And you'll give a beautiful one, Melissa assured him. What should I say? What you always say, the truth. About family, about forgiveness, about how the sea connects people. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, Thomas continued his usual routine, morning classes, working on his book in the afternoon, family in the evening. But there was a difference. He felt truly at peace with himself. One afternoon, while preparing a lesson on reading ocean currents, Jason came running in. Grandpa, you've got to see this. What is it? Jason showed him an article on his phone. It was about Thomas. 65-year-old fisherman becomes a phenomenon in American universities, the headline read. A phenomenon, Thomas laughed. That's a bit much. Read it, Grandpa. Thomas scanned the article, which described how his traditional techniques were being incorporated into university navigation curriculums. Thomas Fisher represents the bridge between ancestral knowledge and modern science, quoted an MIT professor. Grandpa, you're famous. Not famous, recognized. There's a difference. How so? Famous is when people know your name. Recognized is when people value your work. I'd rather be recognized. Melissa walked in just then and overheard. Dad, can I say something? Of course. All these months I've watched you change, not physically but inside. You've become more confident, more open, more whole. It's true. But you know what's changed the most? What? I stopped living in the past. I stopped blaming myself for things I can't change. Now I live in the present and plan for the future. And what future do you plan for yourself? I want to finish the book with you. I want to keep teaching. I want to be present in my grandchildren's lives. And I want to sail for the rest of my days knowing I have a family who loves me. Jason hugged his grandfather. And we'll be here for all of it, Grandpa. I know. And that's what gives me the strength to face any storm that comes. The week of the ceremony arrived quickly. Thomas spent his days revising the speech he had prepared, but every time he rehearsed, he felt something was missing. Melissa, he said the night before the ceremony, I'm not sure my speech is good enough. Let me hear it. Thomas read the speech he had written. It was technical, formal, thanking all the right people. It's well written, Dad, but it's not you. What do you mean? You're not formal or technical. You're human, emotional. You tell stories. Why not give a speech that's truly yours? What if I get too emotional? Dad, that's exactly what made us find you. Your emotion, your humanity. Don't hide it now. That night, Thomas tossed the formal speech aside and decided to speak from the heart. The day of the ceremony dawned with calm seas and a blue sky. The event would take place at the port of Galveston, overlooking the ocean that had been Thomas's life. Hundreds of people attended: fishermen, teachers, students, officials, and of course Thomas's entire family in the front row. When it was his turn to speak, Thomas stepped up to the microphone. He looked at the sea, then at his family, and began. "A few months ago, I was living alone in a secluded bay, convinced I had lost everything that mattered in life. Today, I stand here surrounded by a family who loves me, a community that welcomed me, and receiving an honor I never imagined I deserved." He paused, feeling the emotion rise. "I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because I was lucky enough to be found by special people. 8 men who risked everything to bring me home. A daughter who never gave up searching for her father. Grandchildren who accepted me without knowing my past. A brother who forgave mistakes that only existed in my mind." The audience listened in silence, many with tears in their eyes. If I can teach the young people here anything, it's not about sailing the sea, it's about sailing through life. Don't run from your mistakes. Don't isolate yourself from family. Don't be afraid to accept help. And always remember, home isn't a place, it's where you're loved unconditionally. Thomas looked directly at Jason, Melissa, and Robert. "For 15 years, I lived believing I had lost my family. Today, I've learned that family is something you never lose. It just waits patiently for the right moment to reunite." When he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Melissa wept proudly. Jason shouted, "That's my grandpa," and Robert nodded, approving every word. After the ceremony, as people came up to congratulate Thomas, he stepped away for a moment and gazed at the sea. Jason joined him. "What are you thinking about, Grandpa?" "How it all started with a bottle tossed into the ocean, and how it ended with a family reunited on the shore." "Ended? The story isn't ending, Grandpa. It's just beginning. You're right, this is just the first page of a new chapter." Melissa and Robert walked over. "Dad," Melissa said, "are you ready to go home?" "More than ready. I'm looking forward to starting our next adventure together." "What adventure?" "The one where we're a real family, with all the love, all the forgiveness, and all the stories we still have to create." As they walked together toward the car, Thomas turned one last time to look at the sea. Not with longing or sadness, but with gratitude. The ocean had been his home for 15 years, but now he knew where his true home was. "Thank you," he whispered to the waves. The wind carried the sound of seagulls, as if the sea itself were answering. "You're welcome, now go home." And Thomas went. Home, to his family, to the rest of his life. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're listening from. Do you believe Thomas made the right choice by deciding to return home? Share your honest opinion in the comments. We can't wait to hear what you think. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like this video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartfelt stories.